Okay, well, good morning. And I want to just, first of all, thank Leon for coming on.
One of the best looking Leons
No,
you've ever seen.
thanks, Carrie, for doing this. I had to set up some things behind the scenes with setting up live streams and whatnot, but thanks for being here.
Oh, great.
Anyway, our community always appreciates people sharing their experience, expertise. And so, just in advance, thank you very much. There'll be there very well may be some questions in the chat that we'll try to answer. This is being streamed on YouTube for you guys that are watching YouTube. Hey, welcome back, guys. If you want to catch the whole thing, just head on over to Revero.com. You can come in and be part of this discussion. All right. So first of all, let's just get this part out of the way. Let me just tell me a little bit about where you're located. I always like to know where people are, and then just tell us a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
Sure. I am in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and it's sunny today. Woohoo! So I'm in good old Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I call myself a reformed nutritionist, and now I am a quantum clinician. And so I've run the gamut from being a college athlete, pretty decrepit towards the end of my career, to being a mom with digestive issues, and in the healing process for myself, personal training, massage therapy, performance breathing. I've really run the gamut. I've got a master's degree in applied clinical nutrition, and I now recognize that there's something even more foundational for health and healing, and that is the quantum health circadian biology.
All right, that's a mouthful. Let's first of all, actually, what kind of athlete were you? What kind of sport did you do?
In high school, I did three, right? I did basketball, volleyball, and softball, and I had the opportunity to do all three in college. Chose to do volleyball at a small Division III school because I really liked their pre-med program, but never ended up then actually taking my pre-med degree and becoming a doctor. I kind of went down a different route.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, my oldest daughter is really enamored with volleyball, and I think she's a really good athlete, and I think she'll do well with it. So I assume, are you fairly tall then, I'm guessing, if you're basketball?
No, listen, I'm 5'7", but I had a 33-inch vertical. I trained that like it was, I could jump out of the gym. So that's, I think, what people liked.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the highest recorded vertical jumps of all athletes is in volleyball players. You see some just tremendous, I think you've seen I think even as much as a 15-inch vertical and some very amazing volleyball athletes. All right, so tell me about, you said quantum something.
Quantum, it's quantum health, and it's circadian biology, and it's basically how light helps us.
Okay, yeah, and I'm certainly not unfamiliar with many of the concepts of circadian biology, and I do think it's important. So talk to me. Well, let's just get started. So just kind of lay out your argument and what we need to maybe start with the basics, and then go from there, and we'll see what develops from that.
Yeah, sure. So we if you think about it, right, we need signals in order to understand what, to basically tell ourselves what to do any given day. It's this number really astounded me when I found this out, that every single cell in our body has 100,000 tasks that it has to accomplish every single second. And so if there wasn't some coordinator of all of those tasks, I don't think we would be able to be these complex, beautiful human beings that we are. And so, what is that coordinator? I always intrigued me, like, what is driving the coordination? And so I liken it to needing something like an air traffic control tower for airplanes or for an airport, right? It's like, okay, yes, could a pilot by himself, herself take off? No problem. Figure out how to get out of the airport, figure out how to land. Absolutely. But with the number of planes that are taking off and landing at any given point, we want someone or some entity, this air traffic control tower, telling these planes exactly what speed to come in, what angle, how to swoop around, where they're going to land, where they're going to taxi. We want to make sure all of that is coordinated, because if it's not, that's not an airport that I want to fly in or out of, right? That's an airport that could be a disaster. It could be chaos. And at the cellular level, when there is chaos, or when there is this lack of coordination with all of our cellular tasks, that's synonymous now with inflammation. And inflammation is the driver of pretty much every modern disease that we know. And so then you have to ask yourself, okay, so what is a signal that my cells could have coordinated and synced up all of their tasks to? And that's the day-night cycle, right? It's the one thing that every living creature has been around regardless of where they were on the planet, regardless of how far in the past we want to look, there was always a certain pattern of day and night. And there was always a certain pattern that could change seasonally based on where we're located, how far away from the equator we're located. So we've literally entrained ourselves and our bodies to tie into what's happening with the light signals from our environment and how to coordinate all of our tasks at the cellular level.
Yeah, I think the point, I mean, life is extremely complex. When we go to the most basic single cell organism, or even below that, if you want to look at a virus or prion rather, all the way up to, I guess humans arguably one of the more complex species on the planet. And you've got, like you said, this myriad of millions and millions of, even billions and trillions of biochemical reactions going on simultaneously every second of the day, if you count all the cells in there. And so it's extremely complex. And that complexity grew out of our interaction with our environment. This is how species, navigate themselves in the world. And, I mean, clearly most people realize that the environment that most of us find ourselves in is not the environment that humans found themselves in, since whenever you think we were created. Some people will say it's a few thousand years. Other people think it's, millions of years ago, but regardless. So, obviously sunlight was there. I mean, the earth was there, there's food that was there, there's water that was there. So let's talk about how those things impact this sort of, complexity of life, and how what do you think we need to do, or what can help us?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the interesting thing about food, when we start there, is that we don't use quote unquote macronutrients and they don't become directly energy. There's no protein energy transport chain, right? There's no carbohydrate energy transport chain. There's no fat. Everything in the body breaks down into electrons, protons, neutrons, and photons. These are just basic elementary particles of physics, right? That maybe we heard about back in high school physics class and then forgot about. But when we break things down below the chemical level, that's what things are. And so inside of us, inside of our bodies, we have all of these mitochondria. And so this is really where I think quantum biology and quantum health ties into our health and our well-being. It's how are things being impacted by the mitochondria? We know that mitochondria take electrons. They ferry those electrons down 5 different steps. The 4th step makes water for us. That's cellular water. That's how we actually truly get hydrated at the cellular level. That 5th step makes ATP, which has been synonymous with our energy currency for the body. But I also think that there's a lot of evidence pointing to that it does other things. But those things are essential for life, right? We need to have hydrated cells. We need to have this ATP. And so mitochondria have to then say, okay, how do I know how much ATP and when and where and what cells need it the most? And that comes from, what is Carrie doing right now? Is Carrie outside, and does she need to do things that bend for her survival? Does she need to build a shelter? Does she need to make a baby? Or is this a time of darkness where it would not be smart for Carrie to be going out foraging and hunting for food? So she needs to instead be in this sleep mode. And then our cells will adjust, our mitochondria will adjust the amount of energy that they'll make for us based on those light dark signals. And we have to know too, it even gets a little more specific than that, right? The sunlight, it's not just about being dark, light and dark. Sunlight contains different colors that we would see scattered through a prism. So sunlight through a prism creates a rainbow. And then even in the colors that that's the visible spectrum. There's colors that we can't see, humans can't see, the ultraviolet and the infrared. There's this beautiful range of frequencies coming from sunlight that literally are like nutrients for the body that the cells need. And when they're missing, we're not able to do certain things. We're not able to maximize certain cellular tasks. So each of those colors actually is something that the body uses, some more than others, to organize, to drive, to accomplish some form of task that needs to happen on a daily basis.
Very good. And I was just reminding myself, so quantum, because we've all heard about quantum physics, we don't hear about quantum health that much. So basically it's an energy derived system, quantum, this the lowest common denominator of energy it takes to make something happen, basically. And, you talk about these, obviously high school chemistry, we talk about the different components. And then if you get into the subatomic particles, the quarks, and then, that have charm and all this stuff I remember from college physics many years ago. It's interesting stuff. So obviously, it's winter. Well, I don't, even in as you know, in Michigan, it's darker much earlier. We're right, we're right before the winter solstice. I mean, it's just, we got as little sunlight as we could possibly have in the next few days right now. So how does that, I mean, we all know that, and we know, in the middle of summer, we've got long days and winter we have short days. How does that impact us, and how should we respond to that?
We are meant to be not only tied to the day-night cycle, but tied to the seasons of where we're located. And in particular, where I'm located in Michigan, I view winter as a time of cold, darkness, scarcity, more rest. And so I think we need to recognize that we have built-in programs that the body wants to run during different times of the year. And the winter time is a time when there's more darkness. More darkness means more melatonin. More melatonin means more rest. And melatonin is not just a hormone that puts us to sleep. It is a chemical that then turns on two really important cleaning programs in the body. One of them is apoptosis, which kills off cells that are not serving us anymore. So things like cancer cells. And the other one's autophagy, which takes broken proteins and repairs them. It's the recycling, repairing process of the body. So winter is meant to be a time where we're in more rest, more sleep, more darkness to turn on some key repair programs. It's also a time where perhaps there was more scarcity for food in our environment. Come fall in this area where I would have access to so much, right? There'd be plenty of animals roaming around. There would even be, if I wanted to find root vegetables, whatever it is, right? There'd even be other things that would be in my environment that I could have scavenged, I could have found. That was meant to drive just a little bit of insulin resistance. The plentiful food supply was meant to drive a little bit of insulin resistance. So I stored a little bit extra body fat, because my body then could sense that there would be a time of coldness and scarcity coming. So the winter is meant to be a time where I restore that metabolic pathway, where I reverse a little bit of that insulin resistance, and I allow my body to burn fat as a fuel source more effectively. And that's a very healing process for the body. It's also a very hydrating process for the body. When you burn fat and you break that fat down into electrons, those electrons can transform into so much more cellular water than the carbohydrate cycle could. So, I mean, we're meant to experience certain things at different times of the season. And I think right now our disconnect by being able to modify our environment so it's 70 and sunny all the time is not to the betterment of our health, is actually very much to our detriment.
Well, a couple concepts I want to discuss. So, you mentioned metabolic water, which many people have not heard that term before. But, when we look at the oxidation of fat, you're deriving some of that. But traditionally, we often associate carbohydrates with water retention and storage. I mean, there's the concept that water is associated with glycogen, and some people use the number 4-to-1. Every glycogen molecule gets 4 water molecules with it. What is the purpose of metabolic water? How does it serve us, and why might it be better to be oxidizing fat than consuming carbohydrates? Or maybe that's not even the case. Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Great question. So metabolic water is my passion. And that is because water inside of our bodies is in a fourth phase. It's not a liquid to the extent that we think like this. The research has been around for about 30 years, but Dr. Gerald Pollack out of the University of Washington really, really drove home that the water inside of our bodies is actually more like a gel. It's in a gelled state, and it's called exclusion zone water, and it does very special things for us. When we store water with glycogen, this is the type of water that we store. We're more likely to store it as this bulk liquid water as opposed to the gelled water. They behave completely differently. So yes, carbohydrates will store more of this puffiness or more of this inflammatory feeling of water. Whereas when our mitochondria make the water for us, mitochondria also make the second component needed to create this true metabolic water, this fourth phase of water, exclusion zone water. And that's also mitochondria make infrared heat. The combination of the water that's deuterium depleted made by the mitochondria with infrared heat structures the water into its fourth phase, exclusion zone phase. And that phase of water it's water that's negatively charged. Water is typically neutral, right? H2O is typically neutral, but the water inside of us builds up negative charge next to all biological surfaces. And then right adjacent to that negative charge happens to be a proton zone. So you get negative with a positive, That's a battery. So we literally can draw energy from the water network inside of our bodies, which is why we want our mitochondria to burn fat, because we want our mitochondria to make more water, make more heat. We can also pull in infrared from sunlight and things like that to enhance this process. And this is what really creates true cellular energy when we have this process optimized.
Yeah, you mentioned a fourth phase, and just, I mean, you solid, liquid, gas, and then you're talking about this gelled form. Can you create that gelled form outside the body, or is that unique to biological processes? Is that something that a scientist in a lab can say, hey, I can make this fourth phase water? Because I've not seen that done before. Maybe I'm just perhaps ignorant to it, but what's the story on that?
Yeah, so in a lab, you can make it, but you have to make it next to a hydrophilic surface or a water-loving surface. Every surface inside of our cells and our bodies is hydrophilic. It likes water. It wants to draw water to it, as opposed to, a pan or something where the water beads up and skips off of. And so we are water-loving creatures. And in a lab, you use a specific type of gel called a Nafion gel. And the Nafion gel is a hydrophilic surface that has been used in lab research to mimic membranes and proteins in our body. And when you put regular water next to a hydrophilic surface, you'll create this exclusion zone, this gelled water. And then if you add infrared input to it, like a heat lamp, you can expand that exclusion zone fourfold. So you're basically charging your battery using light, using heat. And I personally think that one of the benefits of exercise is the fact that we're generating our own infrared. We're making our mitochondria make more heat for us. Same thing with sauna therapy. I mean, we can draw a lot of benefits, or we can kind of use this quantum health mindset and this exclusion zone water, and tie together the health benefits of a lot of different things, from sunlight to sauna to exercise. And so, yes, it has been created in a lab before. And in terms of in a glass, in like structured water in a glass, you won't create the gel form in a glass because you don't have hydrophilic surfaces. However, you can create something called supramolecular clusters, which are like the precursor. It is a form of structured water, a structure to the water, a lot like what you'll see ultimately happen against biological surfaces. So you can change your water, but I always try to get people to emphasize it's more important to change the water that's made inside of us, and not always necessarily about the water that we're drinking.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that makes sense. I mean, this is how, none of us evolve drinking some strange water, I suppose. But I mean, when you say, because my understanding, cell membranes typically are these lipid, phospholipid bilayers, and my assumption is those are largely hydrophobic, as fat and water don't mix.
The tails,
yeah, right.
They've got hydrophobic tails and hydrophilic heads, right? So if you picture that bilayer, right, that's why they that's why they're hiding their hydrophobic tails in that bilayer.
I see. Okay, interesting. So, and it's always nice, it's interesting to see the quantum or the molecular or the cellular biology, but most of us are like, I don't know what that means. I don't know how it affects me. How do I impact this in a way that makes sense? So let's talk a little bit about that. What's the real world implications to this? And can we verify whether this is actually going on or happening for us, or what? Well, I guess more importantly, we should define. Okay, so let's just say that this gelled water, and the electron transport chain are important for health. How do we know what's going on when we're sick? What's going on to those things when we're sick, and then we can talk about how do we fix it.
So a lot of great research is pointing to a depletion of the exclusion zone in various inflammatory conditions. So cancer has been studied, for example, and it's been shown to have a lot less exclusion zone. We also know that there's this thing called redox potential. It's a measurement of how well our cells can do reactions, and we need to have more negative charge than positive charge. And so that just basically means more electrons than protons, and exclusion zone water is negatively charged. Redox potential becomes more positive in cancer cells. And so we see this direct correlation between building up this negative charge, like cells by themselves, we know they need a negative charge. And it's been debated forever about how that negative charge happens. Is it pumping in, is it pumps, tons of pumps that, put negative charged minerals and stuff into the cell and pull the positive ones out? Is it all this crazy pump theory, or is it something else? Is it a bunch of, antioxidant things going on in the cell. And what I'm saying is the unifying theory is that we build this exclusion zone water in our mitochondria and we maximize it with infrared. And so that's where the practical applications come in terms of this water. That's number one, is how are we creating it in a beneficial way? And that has to do with mitochondrial health. So number one, my mitochondria have to be functioning. I have to be a fat burner. I don't think someone eating processed carbs all day is necessarily making really good quality exclusion zone water in their bodies. And all of this then ties back to, am I synced? Do I have a strong circadian rhythm synced to the day-night cycle, synced to the season? And so step one for everybody, we got to see the sunrise. We got to get outside at that first morning light, because sunrise has it has the perfect ratio of two colors of light that actually turn on hormone centers in my brain. That it has a blend of red light and blue light. So just picture that prism and the colors of light, you get this beautiful ratio of red light and blue light, and it turns on my hypothalamus, my pituitary, my pineal gland, all of these hormone centers that help me start to feel energized for the day. They make my cortisol, they make my sex hormones. They decide, is Carrie under threat and does she need more cortisol so she can flee? Or is Carrie, is all copacetic and can Carrie make a baby, right? And so so that's an important thing. And I don't think we realize that hormone imbalances in the body actually can be a direct result of our lack of sunlight or our inappropriate light frequencies that are entering our eyes at random times of the day. We have nature said, let's sync it this way, and we're doing it differently now. So that's the first application. Sync up what is happening. That signal with sunrise goes to this master clock in our brain called our suprachiasmatic nucleus that communicates like the time of day to all of our cells instantaneously. It happens on a quantum mechanism via something called oscillation. And so we have to always then make sure that we're tying our light signal through our eyes to that master clock in the brain so that the mitochondria know what kind of water to make and when, and then they also help to control and sync up all the tasks that our cells are doing.
Sorry, I had to figure out my mute button. Yeah, that's interesting stuff. And so, I mean, intuitively, I'm thinking about, meal timing, activity timing. Obviously, we're meant to sleep at night when it's cool and dark. We're supposed to be active during the day. I think that's, most people get that. Many people don't live that way. Many people work shift works. Many people sleep till noon. We see a lot of that stuff going on. And so some people argue this is the most critical thing of our existence. And if we don't get this right, we're doomed to be sick. What sort of, compelling data do you see that would support that? So that sort of particular ideology or that belief that, hey, if we don't get our light right, we're going to be sick, we're going to have cancer, we're going to die, or they're going to get heart disease or whatever might happen from that.
There's been a lot of research, I'd say in the past 5 years or so, on artificial light, right? And so there's less there. First off, I need to put this out there. There's not a ton of money to be made by someone saying, wake up at sunrise and face east, right? It's free. And so there's not going to be a ton of institutions that are necessarily getting millions and millions of dollars in order to research this. But what has been, what the research is starting to get funded is the research that's being done on artificial light and our exposure to this blue light, right? We hear blue light, blue light, blue light, block the blue light. And that's the light that's coming from screens and from artificial light bulbs. And so there's a compelling amount of data now to show that artificial light at night can drive hormonal cancers, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer. We also see a really, really big connection between artificial light at night and insomnia, right? And lack and poor sleep. We see a drive with artificial light at night and a connection to anxiety, depression, PTSD, suicide rates. So there is a ton of compelling evidence to show that the artificial drives disease. Now, that being said, we have to take a slightly different twist on it when we want to look at the healing aspects of sunlight, because that's not being studied a ton. But if you go back simply 100 years, Go to the Swiss Alps. You see so many heliotherapy clinics that were done that put people in natural light to heal so many different ailments, from infection to inflammatory conditions. And then you go back even further and you look at, like, you know, more ancient civilizations. Every single ancient civilization had some form of practice using light, right? Using light. Light held a very, very revered role. And so we have to recognize that we've really dissociated ourselves from that. And I don't think very many people are recognizing what that's truly doing in our bodies. From a mental health perspective, I think that's the one that's growing more and more. We're on screens more now in the past 2 years than we ever have been. And what we're seeing is a huge increase in anxiety and depression. And that's because this particular artificial light frequency that I'm blocking it with my stuff, but that we're typically staring at with screens, that blue light frequency, it stimulates dopamine production in the brain. So it's like a little hit of heroin. And every time I need another bigger hit of heroin in order for me to feel some form of pleasure from staring at this screen. And that means that I'm going to have less pleasure, a less dopamine sensitivity, if you will, when doing other things that would have given me pleasure before. So I teach 2 college courses. I am seeing my college students across the board the past 5 years saying that there's a huge increase in anxiety, depression, and risk of suicide in their peers, in themselves and in their peers. Secondly, then we have to say that, okay, if blue light can do that and can ride these dopamine pathways, is there a pathway in nature that we know of that can boost brain chemicals? And yes, there is. Ultraviolet A light in the morning, so that just beyond that purple color light in the morning, actually takes chemicals in my eyes that were basically brought there from when I slept. They're amino acids. Oh, this group will know amino acids, right? They're amino acids that were in the back of my eyes that were just waiting there, that were there. They're calming amino acids, tyrosine, phenylalanine, and tryptophan. And those amino acids are waiting for sunlight. They're called photon traps. Their phenol rings are photon traps. As soon as a photon of ultraviolet A light hits them, they actually get energized to become another chemical. Tryptophan becomes serotonin. Phenylalanine and tyrosine become dopamine. So like we've got these built-in mechanisms in our brain and in our eyes and in our body to capture sunlight, like a solar panel, suck it in, and then become a feel-good chemical for us. And so we know that happens with the natural light. That's not what, and we know the reverse, like it gets worse, things get worse with the artificial light. So that's where I would say the research is at with my clinical experience as well. Artificial light is directly tied to detrimental health effects, especially at the wrong time of day. And natural light in the morning has been one of the most underused health boosters that I think I know of.
Do we see geographic differences? I mean, I imagine we do. I mean, you know, and because you mentioned, you know, there's people that live, you know, at the equator, and their light cycle is pretty consistent throughout the year. I mean, they have a wet season and a dry season, but they don't have cold. So how does that play into this? You know, we got people like, I'm of Northern European, you know, descent, clearly. I don't know where you're from, but I mean, is there differences in the way certain people deal with this stuff based upon where their sort of ancestral roots are?
Absolutely, there is. So first and foremost, yes, what we do see as we get people who live closer to the equator and live in nature more, right? It doesn't matter where you live if you're indoors, because windows block. They'll block infrared, they'll block red, and they'll block these ultraviolet frequencies that I'm talking about. And so when we look at cultures, populations that live closer to the equator and live mostly outside, we see a significant decrease in all diseases. I mean, the studies that I've read were really focused on autoimmune conditions, a big decrease in autoimmune conditions, and a big decrease in like gut-related disorders, disorders that we would typically associate with the gut microbiome being off. We don't see those in these tropical locations inside the 20th latitude to the equator. Now, we also need to make sure, we also have to recognize we have something called a mitochondrial haplotype. Fancy word for saying my mitochondria, I only got my mitochondria from my mom, and she got them from her mom, and she got them from her mom, and so on and so on and so on. There's a little data showing that paternal things may come into play, but for the most part, the pathway has been shown that we get our mitochondria from our mom, and we can actually trace that lineage back thousands and thousands of years. And so that's how I can say, where did my mitochondria, where did my mom's mitochondria come from? Mine happened to be also a Northern European descent. And so based on that, what I know is my mitochondria were meant to be exposed to seasons, right? They're meant to go through a period of warmth and more sunshine. They're meant to go through a period of cold and more darkness. And, that means that my mitochondria, where I'm living right now, if I live in tune with my seasons, my mitochondria are adapted to that. And so part of this whole thing is, where did my mitochondria come from? And am I using that knowledge to mimic the mitochondria of my maternal ancestors so that I can make sure my mitochondria are thriving? That's a little bit more advanced, because baseline is we got to get outside more, right? We got to get outside more during the day, and we got to block the artificial light at night. That's step one. And then we can go ahead and get into these nuances if we want to layer on different effects.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've heard the concept of a genetic Eve, and it's I think based on mitochondrial DNA or mitochondrial sequencing and stuff. But let's say if I want to go move to Belize, do I have to do anything different having the sort of background that I have? Is there something different I should be aware of? I know you said it's advanced, but it's interesting.
Yeah, sure. No, I find it fascinating too. I could geek out all day about this stuff. I would say that I'd say the reverse is more detrimental. I would say it's when we move to a stronger solar light environment, when there's always, basically 12 hours of brightness, 12 hours of darkness, and we sync ourselves to that. I would say it's easier for people of northern latitude descent to move to the equator and thrive than it is to be the opposite. That's just general. That's just a general statement. The one thing though that I would add, if you're of a Northern European descent there, Shawn, I would say that you would benefit in the tropics from experiencing cold plunges, because your body would want that cold therapy that cold therapy is actually mitochondrial healing, right? It's anti-inflammatory, it's mitochondrial healing. So there could be something about just being in the tropics too much, too long, too bright of sunlight, too often, and you would benefit from something like cold thermogenesis protocol.
I'm certainly more inclined to jump in an ice bath when it's hot in Houston, Texas, than I am when it's freezing cold. Just for that. All right, let me. I know I know you cover a lot of stuff, and I know there's been some talk in the chat here wanting to hear about this. So there's another concept called grounding, and I know that's going to impact our electrons as well. But can you talk a little bit more about that? Because a lot of it seems kind of just totally. Kind of weird, and a lot of people think it's kind of crazy. But what are your thoughts on that? What are some of the leading thoughts on grounding right now?
Yeah. All this stuff I used to think was woo, right? And embarrassingly, I feel like people knew this for a long time and appreciated it. And I needed the framework of quantum biology to appreciate it. And so let's go back to what I said before. The body is mostly negatively charged, right? This is not a controversial statement, right? You ask any person who's studied any form of biology, molecular biology, biochemistry, the body needs a negative charge. The cells run on a negative charge. That means electrons, right? We need electrons. We need more electrons. And so the cool thing about the Earth that I don't think people realize is that the Earth's surface is like a vast repository of electrons. Like infinite electrons are coming from the Earth's surface at any given moment. And so when we make bare skin contact with the Earth, our connective tissue, our fascia, collagen, you can call it a lot of different things, is a semiconductor. It acts as a semiconductor, and it pulls electrons from this vast surface into the body. And those electrons can act as antioxidants. Those electrons can get passed to the mitochondria directly and interact with that electron transport chain to make energy and make water for us. And those electrons also can just keep that strong negative charge of our cells. We also know that electrons are able to increase the exclusion zone, that fourth phase of water too. So there's a direct interaction between the electrons being able to, I don't want to say expand, but I want to say charge up that exclusion zone to have a stronger negative component to it. And so yes, grounding was something that I used to think was woo, but now I know that it has plenty of impacts on physiology. I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in my clients. I would put grounding below light, right? So grounding is important because besides getting electrons through our bare feet to help all those things that I discussed, grounding is a way to sense the magnetism of the earth. The earth releases its own magnetic field, and we've got sensors. The water in our body is actually, it senses magnetism, right? And it can shift its orientation slightly based on that. And all of that coordinates stuff, like every little shift and every little lineup, every little input that it can get, our body can get from our environment helps us to sync our tasks that much better. I would say light's stronger, but I would say that grounding is a close second.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned magnetism. I wonder if you have any insight on this. My understanding is the Earth's magnetic poles flip every once in a while. Every 100 years or so, they flip directions. Does that have a health impact on us when that happens? I mean, is there anybody that's actually looked into that?
People have looked into it. I think it's going to be because I think we're close actually to a pole flipping right now. I think it's going to be we're going to have to see, but we do know that periods of more intense change when it comes to electromagnetic fields, such as solar flares too, when the sun kind of releases a big sunspot and it creates a solar flare, we know that those things can have detrimental health consequences, and they have in the past. So I don't want to worry anyone. But I would say that yes, anytime we significantly alter a magnetic field, magnetic fields and electric fields are the same, right? Anything that makes a magnetic field also makes an electric field. So I call them electromagnetic fields. Anytime we experience a big shock or change in an electromagnetic field, it has the potential to be harmful to the body, which is something that I think we have to pay attention to also with technology, because it is a non-native form of electromagnetism that the body has not been used to, right? I would say the past 30 years, it's really picked up. And we know there's actually some direct studies that show that non-native electromagnetic fields can decrease the size of the exclusion zone up to 20% or more. So I would say that we have to be very aware of that the technology, I think, is going to be a bigger issue than the flipping of the poles, but that could be to be determined.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly surrounded by technology. Obviously, we're doing this due to technology, so it's hard to escape, and as homes get quote unquote smarter and smarter, perhaps, they're actually getting dumber, perhaps, for our health is concerned. It's just a question in here. I want to make sure I just be mindful of folks' questions. You mentioned melatonin and its import in a whole host of things. What about supplementation of melatonin? Does that make sense, or is that just kind of redundant and not helpful, and we need to just do the light stuff? What about the people that say, hey, I've got these issues, can I kickstart things by taking some melatonin?
Melatonin would be a short-term thing, if ever, right? So potentially if someone is suffering from extreme jet lag or extreme insomnia, or there is data showing that it can be beneficial for immune system function. But in my opinion, anytime the body can make a chemical or a hormone, I want to first maximize my body's production. I want to optimize my body's production of it. So I'm not a fan of melatonin supplementation long-term. If you need melatonin to go to sleep at night, in general, to me, it means you're not getting morning sunlight and you're not blocking the artificial light at night. I have seen, everyone comes to me and they say they're a night owl. Genetically, there's night owls. And it's like, yeah, but Sachin Panda shows that that's about 1% to 3% of the population, and 100% of people who come to me are night owls. And so I've literally had people go camping who are night owls, go camping for 3 or 4 or 5 days, and they will start to fall asleep with the sun and wake with the sun. Or start to fall asleep with sunset and wake with the sun. And these are people who are going to bed consistently at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, like my tech executives and stuff. So I would say that if you think you need melatonin to go to sleep, I would like for people to try altering their light environments first, and you would be surprised at what an impact that could have.
Yeah. So, and just, a lot of people, like I said, to wear glasses to block blue light. They'll use a red light prior to bedtime. How do we all, obviously we can't all camp 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Society just doesn't allow that anymore. I guess you could, but it's hard.
Sure.
So how do we maintain our light environment that would optimize or at least improve melatonin production, sleep, circadian, all the circadian biology that's going on? What do you typically utilize?
There's a couple of key strategies for that. So, I'm a mom of 3, right? Like we got a busy family. We got stuff going on. My kids don't want me to shut off all the light, at now 5:11 or something, whenever the sun sets. But I think we have to be aware during the day, in my opinion, if ever you can shut off artificial light, it's worth it, because that signal is confusing. You can take there's cameras that take a picture of the light frequencies that are coming from various things. Fluorescent lighting looks so foreign to the body and to the brain. So if I can shut off artificial light and have a window in front of me, that's better. If I can this window, even just a crack, that's even better. So cracking windows matters. I don't think it's really recognized that light travels in two different ways. So light comes to us from the sun, and it can be a particle like a bullet, or a wave like water. And so all light needs, so, because modern glass wants to block the ultraviolet, the red, the infrared, these really important colors of light that are missing from my internal environment. All I have to do is open windows, and then light will travel in like water, and it'll bring extra frequencies into my environment. So cracking windows whenever you can during the day, turning off the artificial stuff, if at all possible, super beneficial. And then getting light exposures at key times. Like I said, that sunrise hit is key. That like when ultraviolet A is present, that's key. Sometime during the middle of the afternoon, during the summer for me is beneficial, because vitamin D, I don't have UVB right now, but at some point during the summer, I want to be able to make vitamin D every single day with that UVB light. And then in the evening, as the sun starts to set, I need to mimic that in my house. So the way I do that here is we turn off most lights, right? And then we have other light bulbs. Like I use something called Edison style incandescent bulbs. So dimmer bulbs, right? We do have a couple of red bulbs that we do if we need extra light, but the house is just generally dimmer. And I avoid bright LEDs. I avoid, any form of bright LED at all after sunset. And it's more these these lamps that have these little calm bulbs, dimmer bulbs. And at a certain point, I will, take these glasses off, right? And I'll put on an orange or a red pair of lenses, because, I like watching football at night too, right? Don't get me wrong. My husband, we sit on the couch. We got bowl season coming up. So I will put on red sunglasses or red blue blocking glasses that will block 100% of the artificial blue light and probably 50 to 70% of the green light, which can impact people's sleep. And I'll be tired about 30 minutes, 45 minutes after putting those on, because my brain signals that it's dark and my melatonin is starting to take effect.
Interesting. I'm sure you're familiar with a fellow by the name of Jack Cruz. He's a neurosurgeon that's been talking about light and deuterium and things like that for quite a number of years now. One thing him and some of the other guys, and I can't remember all the other people that do, I know there's a lot of people that talk about this now, but mentioned that, and I know you kind of touched on deuterium. Different foods are either deuterium repleted or depleted. How does that impact? How does that impact our quantum biology, I suppose?
Sure. Deuterium is a form of hydrogen, right? And it's a form of hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most simple element, because it's literally a proton. It is a proton. And so, and our body, like I said, we're full of electrons and protons. There's like that negatively charged electron-rich exclusion zone, and there's a line of protons. Our mitochondria move protons to make ATP for us. It's this creating this gradient of protons, if you will. And the fifth step of what our mitochondria are doing is they're pulling protons literally through like a channel. It's called the ATPase. They're pulling it through a motor. And that production of that push of protons through that motor is what produces this enough energy to make this energy-rich ATP molecule, right? Let's just go with that. That motor relies on a certain size. And so picture hydrogen is just a bunch of basketballs, right? These basketballs are going through this hoop that perfectly fits one basketball. When you have another form of hydrogen called deuterium, it's a hydrogen so it's a proton attached to a neutron, a double basketball. It'll double the molecular weight. Try to put a double basketball through that fifth step, through that basketball hoop, it's going to clog things up. So the reason you hear things about deuterium is because it has a direct impact on that fifth step of the mitochondrial electron transport chain. It clogs things up. Yes, different plants and different waters and different macronutrients, if you will, have different forms of have different amounts of deuterium. And so the body only wants to have just enough deuterium. It's not a bad thing to have some deuterium. We need some. But when we have excessive amounts, because our drinking water, our tap water has 155, parts per billion, when we're eating tons of carbohydrates, especially out of season, which are higher in deuterium, when we're not eating lots of animal fat, which is really low in deuterium, and when our mitochondria are just more toxic and not synced up with the right circadian signals, that's where having a higher deuterium load comes into play.
Thank you for that. That's an interesting thing. So how do you implement quantum health with your clients? Obviously you're not examining someone's mitochondrial electron transport chain. You can't do that. At least I guess you have a scanning electron microscope, you might be able to, but how do you, what's the typical interaction like? Somebody comes to you and said, hey, I can't sleep, I'm fat, I'm diabetic, whatever. How do we get these people straight?
So an assumption, if someone comes to me with a diagnosed Western disease, is that they've got some form of mitochondrial dysfunction, period. Dr. Doug Wallace, who's a researcher out of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, he's like the preeminent mitochondrial researcher in the world. And he's shown that pretty much every disease, besides a couple of genetic diseases, has a form of mitochondrial dysfunction. And it depends on the tissue that the mitochondria are dysfunctional in and the amount of dysfunctional mitochondria, like each tissue reaches a threshold, and that what then will drive symptomatology. So if someone comes to me with a disease, it's pretty obvious to me that they've got mitochondrial dysfunction. And I'll ask a couple of questions. I have a 300 question questionnaire that I just love, because it gives me the opportunity to look at a whole bunch of information from these people that would take me hours to ask these questions. So I'll review this questionnaire, but then I will always ask, talk to me about what you did yesterday. When did you wake up? When were you outside? When did you go to sleep? When did you shut the TV off? Yeah, like I'll ask these questions that I know are impactful in terms of their circadian rhythm. And 10 out of 10 times, you will find circadian rhythm dysfunction in these people who have these mitochondrial diseases. And so that's where I start to really have to educate the client. Well, nowadays people come to me because they know this is what I do, right? Like I don't have to convince people as much anymore. But what I had to do for a while is convince people that their light environment was driving their mitochondrial dysfunction, and their mitochondrial dysfunction was driving disease. And so that's what an interaction would typically look like. And like I said, nowadays, I think people are starting to recognize, whoa, this is a thing, and I want to do something about it.
Yeah. When we are, here's another question about aging. Obviously I look at aging as basically just the accumulation of disease is kind of how I kind of interpret aging in a lot of ways. A lot of people, I'm getting another question about melatonin. Do we lose the capacity to produce melatonin as we age? Is there anything we can, obviously do about it? Is an older person inherently less equipped to interact with their environment than a younger person, or is that something that you can have a decent amount of control over?
We've got a built-in anti-aging mechanism in our cells. That's that autophagy program that I spoke of earlier that needs melatonin to repair, right? To reverse age. So aging in my opinion, is a loss of that program. We haven't been running that program. And it's also a loss of information. David Sinclair is a researcher out of Harvard who really talks about aging as a loss of information. He talks about it at the DNA level, but I look at it as every particle of light in my environment is a source of information. This is basic quantum mechanics too. Electrons, photons, they're energy, but they're also information. And so I'm literally swimming in a sea of information right now. And I just feel like aging is the accumulation of bad information, right? We're indoors more, we're not outside as much. And if we're not outside as much, and nowadays it's, like I said, exponential in the past 10 years. LED lights and more screens, right? Now we're seeing so much bad light information that it's really impacting my sleep too, because that blue light directly suppresses melatonin. So now I'm, 70 years old and I'm watching, I want to still watch the news at 10 o'clock every night. And that TV, which didn't used to emit that crazy blue light like it went like before, nowadays it's shooting this crazy blue light into my eyes and it's totally suppressing my melatonin. And so now I'm not running that cleaning program and I'm giving my brain the wrong lighting information, the wrong signal. So I have seen people who are in their 70s, 80s. I mean, I even have my 96-year-old grandpa he's on the 4th floor of his apartment, a retirement complex, opening the window. They've got a little tiny bathroom window that opens this much. He's at sunrise. He's doing that and taking his glasses off. And he's like, my granddaughter's telling me I got to do this, right? And so he's doing it and he's actually noticing an improvement in his sleep. So I would say that, yes, things slow down, things change maybe a little bit, but aging is not it's not a death sentence that you have to be like that, right? It doesn't have to happen that way. I think there's ways that we can really improve our body's functions, our cellular functions, so that it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm old, I can't make melatonin anymore, so I'm just going to supplement. It's not like that.
Is there a minimum effective dose? Like I'm sitting here, it's about 36 degrees outside. It's fairly cold. I went for a walk this morning. I took a half. Every morning I get up, I walk my dogs first thing in the morning. So I kind of get that morning activity. But how much, it's not practical for me to work outside in 36 degrees, particularly if I'm doing what I'm doing now. How much exposure do I need, or does the average person need to get to sunlight, to being outside? What would you say is appropriate? Or
Shawn, I would say for someone like you, who's a very healthy human being, you're more like needing little hits of consistent light day in and day out, right? So like that morning walk that you do is perfect. I would even say, if for you, 3 minutes, give every sunrise, 3 to 5 minutes every sunrise, another signal sometime around lunch, in the evening, and then just kind of getting rid of the garbagey light is all your body would need. It's consistency that matters, because we need to entrain our brain again to those light cycles, as opposed to these indoor artificial frequencies. Someone who's dealing with a complex mitochondrial disease like Alzheimer's disease or cancer, they're going to need a lot more consistent, light signals from outside and longer periods of time.
Yeah, I mean, you often see, even in these retirement homes, they just kind of wheel people outside to sit out in the sunlight when they can. I mean, I think that's a sorry, somebody beat on my door. My dogs are barking. I think that's a kind of a, it's maybe a historical thing, but I think there's some relevance to that. And, I think the good thing for me is I have dogs, and so I'm forced to go outside at least several times a day. So I'm going to be, I'll be going for another walk in a few hours and stuff like that. So I appreciate it. Now, unfortunately, we're running out of time and I got to do a consult in a few minutes, but I really appreciate this information. I think the community does too. One, I'd like to say, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find out more about you and quantum health and that type of stuff. So please do that. And then also maybe we can just maybe have a follow-up discussion, because I know there's a lot of material that you probably have that we haven't discussed it. So hopefully we can do that down the road. Becky's putting in your Instagram number in there, but if you'll share that stuff for us so people listening can hear where to find.
Yeah, sure. So, I post on Instagram every single day something about quantum health and light and that 4th phase of water. So that's a really great place. If you want to kind of dive into this, that's a really great place to get started. Then also I have a YouTube channel. I just started that recently, but I've interviewed people who are, I guess more pioneers in this quantum health field, but I also then will do my own breakdown. So if you're interested in earthing, I did my own little one on earthing that people really like about, so they get the science of the earthing. So when they explain it to their, significant other, it's like, oh no, I'm going barefoot for a reason. That this is healthy, this is healing. Here's why. So that's Carrie B Wellness on YouTube, Carrie B Wellness on Instagram. I also am actually teaching a course in this. My one-on-one list got way too long, and I was booking people out into, April, May, June, and it wasn't sustainable for me, and it's not sustainable for the client, frankly. And I think there's something to be said about learning this information as a group and applying it as a group, because a lot of these things are foundational, and we can get specific in the group for people, but we also have to say everybody needs some form of sunrise in their eyes, right? Everybody. And so that I'm launching a class with another quantum clinician, Dr. Corey Gasvini. He's in Florida, and he is the optimal light doc. And we're teaching this class in January. So January 8th, we're going to be launching the quantum self-healing masterclass. If you're on, DM me on Instagram if you want to know, or email me, carriebwellness@gmail.com. We're going to literally help people apply all of this stuff step by step by step, so that they know that they're using their lighting environment to maximize their health, and they're doing everything that they need to support that at the quantum level. And so those are the best ways to get a hold of me. I'm a super low key person, so please just shoot me an email, shoot me a DM. I'd love to interact and connect and answer any questions.
All right, thanks for that, Karen. Thanks for being here, and keep up the good work. We got so many people who need to get healthy, and it's a big task, and we need all of us that can do it to do it. So thanks again, and appreciate it. All right, folks, thanks for being here. I will be back tomorrow on Saturday. You guys take care. See you later. Bye, Carrie.
Bye, Shawn. Thank you so much.
Join Revero.health for a 30-day free trial to get access to live Q&A with VIP guests, social community meetings, member discounts, low-carb healthcare providers list, forum, workouts, monthly challenges, early access to podcasts, recipes, carnivore diet guide, fasting guide, shred guide, and much more.